Okay, so Joshua chapter 13. Now, last week we were talking about Joshua chapter 12 and that there's a big chunk of the book of Joshua right in the middle that is just a delineation of place names and borders, and this tribe got that and this tribe got that, and we defeated this place and that place. It's just like a record. And as I mentioned previously, you kind of have to slow down and dig and see what you can find in some of this stuff because it can seem tedious. Last week we were able to, dig through and come up with some interesting things, and I asked you, to read through it and see what you thought. But what I'll do is I'll read through chapter 13. It's not terribly long, and it's got Angela, can you check the air for me? It's not terribly long, so I'll read through it. And there's a couple of interesting things that I want to touch on chapter 13, and then perhaps we'll move forward to 14 because there's not a whole lot that I anticipate saying. But again, you never know what's going to happen. So I'm going to put up on the screen my presentation so that you can see my translation. Let's see. Okay, let me know if you can see my slide. Is that it? Okay, good deal. All right, so there's the book of Joshua, chapter 13, and here we go. So Joshua 13, starting in verse 1, says, "Now Joshua was old and advanced in years when Jehovah said to him, 'You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land remains to be possessed. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and all those of the Geshurites, from the Sihor, which is east of Egypt, even as far as the border of Ekron to the north, it is counted as Canaanite. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazite, and the Ashdodite, the Ashkelonite, the Gittite, the Ekronite, and the Avite to the south, all the land of the Canaanite, and Mirah that belongs to the Sidonians as far as Aphek, to the border of the Amorite, and the land of the Gebelite, and all of Lebanon toward the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon as far as Lebo Hamat, all the inhabitants of the low country from Lebanon as far as Misrepot Maim. Remember, that is the burning waters, which is a very curious expression. All of the Sidonians, I will drive them out before the sons of Israel. Only allot it to Israel for an inheritance as I have commanded you. Now therefore apportion this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh. With the other half tribe, the Reubenites and the Gadites, received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan to the east, just as Moses, the servant of Jehovah, gave to them. From Aror, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with the city which is in the middle of the valley, and all the plain of Medeba, as far as Dibon, and all the cities of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, as far as the borders of the sons of Ammon, and Gilead, and the territory of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and all Mount Hermon, and all Bashan as far as Selakah, all the kingdom of Og of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. He alone was left of the remnant of the Rephaim, for Moses struck them and dispossessed them. But the sons of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites or the Maacathites from Geshur, and Maacath live among Israel until this day. Only to the tribe of Levi did he not give an inheritance. The offerings by fire to Jehovah, the God of Israel, are their inheritance, as he spoke to them. So Moses gave an inheritance to the tribe of the sons of Reuben according to their families. Their territory was from Aror, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with the city which is in the middle of the valley, and all the plain by Medeba. Heshbon and all its cities which are on the plain, Dibon and Bamat Baal and Bet Baal Meon and Yahaz and Kedemot and Mephaat. And Kiriathaim and Sibma, and Zeret Shahar on the hill of the valley, and Beth Peor and the slopes of Pisgah, and Beth Yeshimot. Even all the cities of the plain, and all the kingdom of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, whom Moses struck, with the chiefs of Midian, Evi and Rechem, and Zur and Hur and Reba, the princes of Sihon, who lived in the land. The sons of Israel also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, the diviner, with the sword, among the rest of their slain. The border of the sons of Reuben was the Jordan. This was the inheritance of the sons of Reuben according to their families, the cities and their villages. Moses also gave an inheritance to the tribe of Gad, to the sons of Gad according to their families. Their territory was Yazer, and all the cities of Gilead, and half the land of the sons of Ammon, as far as Aror, which is before Rabbah, and from Heshbon as far as Ramat Mispeh and Betonim, and from Mahanaim as far as the border of Debir. And in the valley, Beth Haram and Beth Nimrah, and Sukkot and Zaphon. The rest of the kingdom of Sihon, the king of Heshbon, with the Jordan as a border, as far as the lower end of the Sea of Kinneret, beyond the Jordan to the east. Angela, is that someone at the door? This is the inheritance of the sons of Gad, according to their families, the cities and their villages. Moses also gave an inheritance to half the tribe of Manasseh, and it was for the hill tribe of the half tribe of the sons of Manasseh, according to their families. Their territory was from Mahanaim, all Bashan, all the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, and all the towns of Jer, which are in Bashan, 60 cities. Also, half of Gilead, with Ashtaroth and Edrei, the cities of the kingdom of Og and Bashan, were for the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, for half of the sons of Machir according to their families. These are the territories which Moses apportioned for an inheritance in the plains of Moab, beyond the Jordan, at Jericho to the east. But the tribe of Levi, Moses did not give an inheritance. Yehovah, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he had promised them. So that is all of chapter 13, and wasn't that a fun exercise in trying to speak Hebrew? Yeah, that's did I do okay? What's up?
Great.
Thank you, Jimbo.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's always a challenge, and you can see how I would be reading through this and going, man, what am I supposed to teach about this? What am I supposed to do? And it only gets worse. In chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 is all borders and places. But my promise to you is that I'm going to pour through it, and I'm going to try to find something that's useful, interesting, and instructive. Last week we talked about, what did you take away from last week that you thought was like at least semi-important about the list of stuff? Anybody? Angela?
Really?
Why not?
I gotta look at what it was.
Well, it was another list of places and names. So what I remember of it was that, there's an important piece of wisdom here, which is remember the victories that God has given you. That it's always good to keep track of your victories in the Lord, because you need a record of those things. They are encouragement for you. So in this week's section, I can no longer rely upon that trope. I must move forward. So,
There's another person coming through.
yes, indeed.
Late.
Now, what's interesting to me is what's interesting to me is you notice that it says Joshua is old. And even it's really funny the way it actually says it. Now Joshua was old, and the Lord said, "You are old." And the text seems to suggest that he's not in great shape anymore, that he's like worn out and beat up or something, which is a little unusual because what did we note about Moses, first of all? That dude was 120 years old, and he said, he's full of vim and vinegar, and he's still able to go out and come in. And Caleb, in the next chapter, he's 85, and he says, I'm as strong today as the day when I first entered the promised land. I could still go to battle. But here it says of Joshua, he's beat up.
Stricken.
I don't know why that might be.
I forget the lady's name. She's the rabbi's wife that's building the temple in Jerusalem.
Right now?
That's working to build the temple.
Like Chaim Richmond or something?
Yeah, his wife.
Okay.
Rena. She's done some. She really loves this guy, and she's mad at Israel because she says basically when Judges opens, they just wanted to go get their land. They want to go stake their claims and go see what they got. And so he died. They just dumped him at the bottom of a mountain, dead volcano, and just.
Who are we talking about?
The Israelites. They
Dumped who?
Joshua.
Joshua?
Yeah.
Really?
He wasn't buried adequately.
That's coming up at the end of the section.
They just like, oh, he's dead. They buried him, and they went on. And
Well, then we'll find out.
Judges was so rough.
Well, okay, that's interesting. We'll find out when we get to the end of Joshua because it does talk about him dying, and I'd be curious because if that is true, that would certainly be curious and rather prophetic, frankly. But we'll have to see. Are you waving at me, Carla? Oh, you can't hear. Can you hear me? Oh, you can't hear me at all? You can hear me. You can't hear him. He was talking about Chaim Richmond's wife was saying something about how Joshua, when he died, that the Israelites like just dumped him on the side of the road and, threw up a couple of stones and just walked away.
And they went to find their land.
And went to get their land. That is the first I'm hearing of it. That could be true. I don't know. We'll have to dig a little bit more into that. But it certainly was just odd to me that it said that he was old and seemed to imply that he was decrepit, but certainly the text has said exactly the opposite regarding Moses when he was old. It even said simply the opposite when Aaron was old. And, Caleb in the next chapter is 85. He says, I'm still strong as an ox. Now, that could be, it might be some hyperbole, but he did still do some battle after that with the inhabitants of Hebron and another place where he was trying to conquer. So it just struck me as odd that Joshua seems to be depicted in a very different way. Also notice that God, when he said there are yet many enemies, not to defeat, but to possess. You notice that? It's a little bit different. And what I surmised as I was reading through this was, when it talked about these places, I believe it was in chapter 9 or 10, after they had defeated the people in the southern region and they started going up north, it had these list of battles, and that was when hailstones were falling and people were dying. Remember, it seemed kind of unclear about whether they were killing everyone. It only seemed like that one, I think it was Hatzor, the king of Hatzor was the one who was killed, and all of his people and his city was burned to the ground, but he let the other ones remain. And then they chased them down to Misrepot Maim, which was the burning waters, the lake of fire, which was very unusual. The text there seemed to suggest, and I think it comports with what we're reading here, is that they went around and defeated a lot of people, but they didn't possess their land. It's like they weren't ready to do it. In fact, in a coming chapter, Joshua is going to say, what are you guys doing sitting around? We got work to do. They were kind of congregating Tower of Babel-like at Gilgal. But I see what I think is happening here, and this is why it's worded in this way, where it says there are still land to possess, things to possess. What that suggests to me was that they went out and defeated their enemies, killed the kings who were leading these enemies, and defeated their soldiers, but left the elderly and the women and the children in possession of those places, and then did not go and move in and take possession of them. It's like they were perfectly happy to destroy the enemy soldiers, but then just leave the elderly and the widows and the orphans in those cities and just let them possess them. And I think that this is what God is talking about here. Yes, we've defeated a lot of these enemies, but you need to go in and possess that land. Now, I don't think God is saying go in and wipe out and kill everybody. Doesn't suggest that. It doesn't say that. It says you need to possess it. So I think that they were, and you know, here's the thing. It seems like the Israelites were not ready to spread out and occupy. They were ready to keep together as a group and move around and do battle where battle needed to be done, but they were not yet ready to spread out and land. Well, and not only that, but we're actually going through right now, in these next several chapters, the lots that are being cast for which tribe is going to have which land. It hasn't really been apportioned yet. So what they've done is they've moved around as a group and defeated all of their enemies, and now God is saying, okay, we've defeated a lot of enemies. There are still, he does delineate some enemies that still need to be defeated, primarily the Philistines on the southwestern coast, and also deep south. In the deep south, there are still some enemies, and in the high north, there are still some enemies. And a few here and there inside the territories that they have already defeated. So, not only, yes, we do have enemies that still need to be defeated, and I think there's a lesson in itself right there, right? There are always enemies that need to be defeated. Remember that if you look at the Jordan River as a spiritual barrier, the west side is the spiritual side, the east side is the physical side. You move into that spiritual land, there are enemies that need to be defeated, always. Those are spiritual enemies. Those are the battles that you and I are engaged in our own souls. Soul correction. They call it tikkun. Tikkun is the Hebrew term that means you're correcting your soul. Every one of you is on a journey to correct your soul. At least I hope you are, right? Paul, as long as you're alive and as long as you are a person who is born again, you are continuously struggling to replenish and rejuvenate and restore your soul. So this, I think, is another spiritual metaphor of there are still pockets of resistance in the land.
How many allies did they have at that time? Because it almost sounds like for anyone is an enemy
Yeah.
at this point. I mean, like, conquer as much as you want, and of course also the promise
Mhm.
made by or to Abraham. But did they have any, besides of the one that we talked about a couple of weeks ago? But
The Gibeonites?
yes,
Yeah, well, you know, that's a great question. The Gibeonites, I don't think so much. They did have a treaty with them, clearly, because they helped when the Gibeonites got attacked. Did the Gibeonites help them? I would assume that's part of the treaty. If we let you live, you're going to be water bearers and wood choppers for our temple. We don't have one of those yet, so unless you want to die, you got to keep up your part of the bargain. We just rescued you from the northern kings. You're going to send some soldiers to fight with us, and prove that you're with us. I assume that's part of the treaty. Was there anyone else? Yes, and that's coming right up. We'll talk about that in just a second. Good question, though. So, in regards to the lands remaining, let me just see if I have a slide here. Yes, I'm gonna present this slide to you one more time, just so you have something to look at. It's kind of interesting. It's coming up now. Yes, you should see. Can you see that, Carla? Kinda. Okay. So this is the apportionment of the tribes of Israel, and I don't know if my cursor is visible online. But these 5 cities down here are the Philistines, and they are primarily located in the region that is belonging to the tribe of Judah. And then there are lands down to the south here which are still occupied by some enemies. And then up here north near Mount Hermon are also some enemies that still need to be. And of course, you know, the Sidon entire Lebanon, Syria is up there. You can argue about whether that is actually a part of the promised land. I think it is, but not at this time, it seems. But this is the tribal allotment of what is going to be distributed amongst the tribes. You can see that Judah is down south. Simeon is embedded within Judah, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You've got Dan here, and another little section that belongs to Dan up here. So they are split in two. You've got Reuben on the west or the east side of the Jordan, Gad on the east side of the Jordan, half of the tribe of Manasseh on the east side and half on the west side. You got the little tribe of Benjamin in here where the city of Jerusalem is. It says Jebus right now. That's the Jebusites. Ephraim has a little section right here. Manasseh again. Oops. Sorry. Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and again a little section of Dan. Notice that who is the largest landowner, so to speak, Manasseh has a tremendous amount of land.
And it's good land.
Yeah, it's also very good land. That's an excellent observation. Now Judah, but look at it in relation to Judah. Judah's portion is also very large, but it's a very different kind of land. Now, do you know what are your thoughts regarding the spiritual condition of the land itself, or what it might represent? You know, the rabbis talk about the southern kingdom. That's all desert. That's all pretty scrubby, hilly, rocky desert.
Arizona.
It's like Arizona, yes. And they have suggested that this is a place of spiritual growth, that it's tough, that you have to rely on God more, that it's somehow a spiritual blessing to live in a desolate place, which you should be blessed because you live in Arizona. But up north is a lot of very fruitful land. Falls away into apostasy and idolatry almost immediately. What does that teach us? What would you say that teaches you?
Too easy living.
Easy living sucks you into idolatry real quick. I tell you, I think Jesus said it best. It is harder for a rich man to enter into the kingdom than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. That's obviously a metaphor, and all things are possible with God. But prosperity is hard to manage spiritually. It is for everyone I've ever known, and myself included. But that's just the suggestion that somehow, because you got to really trust in God and eke out a living, and you really have to trust in God for water and for anything good that's going to happen in a place like that, that somehow that's spiritually beneficial. And I got no reason to doubt that necessarily. It's an interesting concept. But note also that the Philistines in Judah here, most of the enemies that are still remaining that we're reading about right now are located in the lands of Judah and Benjamin. Most of them. What does that also suggest to you? More resistance training. That's what it suggests to me. When there are enemies to fight, your strength needs to be kept up. Your reliance on God needs to be kept up. Do you perhaps start to see some inklings of what will happen over the next 400 to 500 years, 600 years? How all these people up in the north will fall away into idolatry and be exiled into the lands of the kingdoms of the world and disappear from the face of the earth entirely almost. But the southern portion of Judah hangs on for another 100, 125, 150 years, gets exiled, but is then brought back, gets exiled again, but still maintains its identity, and then is brought back again 72 years ago. It's an interesting concept about the spiritual dichotomy that you have going on in this land and the conditions that are faced, the enemies that are faced, the continued strengthening and resistance that needs to happen in all of these places. Now, while I have this slide up, I'm going to move to this next slide just to show you something that's kind of interesting. Note that in this little section that we read, that it is mentioned twice that the tribe of Levi was given no inheritance. It'll say it again 2 or 3 times. It's like 5 times it is noted the tribe of Levi has no inheritance. Now this is just we'll talk about the spiritual representation and impact in a moment, but just note these little circles right here that say Levi. Levi. This is in some ancient map. Here's another one, Levi. What that shows you is no territory was assigned to the tribe of Levi, but cities were assigned to the city. Some of them are cities of refuge, some of them are not. And 1,000 yards approximately around each one of those cities, and that's why you see the circle around those little cities, is dedicated to farmland, pasturage. You know, that land is not owned, but used by the Levites.
Did
So-
they also have like temples because there were? Of course,
No, it's used for farming and agriculture, for working and doing things outside of the land. Because remember that these tribes, the tribe of Levi, not all of them will serve in the temple. You remember also, if you look at the courses, the 12 courses that King David set up for the Levites to serve in the temple, it was like certain clans within a tribe would take their turn at the temple for like a series of weeks, and then they would go back home and work their own fields, minister in their own areas. Remember, these guys are Torah teachers. These are your civil servants, police officers, judges, temple officers, Torah teachers. This is their function. They do not have an inheritance in the land. They are actually civil servants, both spiritual and civil servants to everyone else. Taxes support them, in a sense. Basically, what you're looking at, all of the tithes that are given at the temple are distributed to those Levites. And they often do other work in the towns that they live in. And they also do some farming and stuff on the outskirts of those towns. You know, that's really, if Paul tells us that we are a spiritual priesthood, which we are, and he also tells us that a minister of the gospel should have a job, which he does, it makes perfect sense from the ancient pattern that you see here. These aren't just civil servants who are sitting around on the government dole, you know, taking temple money, that at least they shouldn't be. Now we have the example of Eli and his sons in the time of Samuel, who was just living it up on the government dole, taking the taxes, abusing their privileges to take from the populace. But they should be working, supporting themselves, but also having a bounty from the tribes who give their tithe. So you see Paul talk about that in his own case. He's like, you know, a minister of God should serve. Paul was a tent maker, and he encouraged other people to support themselves so that they would not be a burden to anyone. That's a very different ministry than you see these days with a, you know, pastor. Now, I don't begrudge a pastor who, you know, needs to earn a living. You know, can you study the Bible full time? You certainly can. You certainly can, and you certainly should, I guess, if you're a pastor. But you're getting paid to do it. So, that's neither here nor there, but it's certainly interesting. And I just wanted to show you that because when I come to Levi in just a second, that'll kind of lock in and make a little bit more sense. But I was just going to say, in regards to the Philistines briefly, what do you guys know about the Philistines? Who are these people? Where did they come from? Do you guys know? They were there when the Israelites showed up. The ancient records of the Egyptians also attest to the fact that the Philistines had been living on the south coast of the land of Israel, Canaan, whatever, for a long time. What's interesting is, that you ever heard the expression used pejoratively, calling someone a Philistine? Do you know what that means? What is the... It's a very derogatory comment, but what do you think that means?
Godless.
They're pagan.
God-hater.
Pagan, godless. What's that?
Liars?
Okay, so yeah, you're coming up with very negative connotations, and I assumed all those same things: a Philistine, a liar, a pagan, godless. When you look that up, what you see is that expression, a Philistine, is someone who has no respect for the culture, the cultural value of others. No respect for the values of other people and the way they do things. Which is interesting because according to any historical and archaeological records that can be found, the Philistines are actually Greeks. They are Greeks who left either Cyprus, Crete, somewhere in the Aegean Sea. They migrated to the other side of the Mediterranean, in the southeastern Mediterranean, in the land of Israel, and had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. But they're Greeks. Now, that I found a little bit fascinating, especially since it is among these Philistines that you see these giants keep popping up. You notice that it will mention again a couple of times that there were giants living in and among these Philistines. That's where Goliath was from.
This would explain why they wear bronze.
Yes, it certainly might explain why they wear bronze, because Greeks were a Bronze Age culture from way back. It's also interesting in the sense that you look at Greek mythology regarding heroes and men of renown, and that's what you're talking about when you're talking about giants. I don't know if you've ever done a little, not a study, because it's not really a study, but just a little mind entertainment thinking about Greek mythology somehow connected to the Bible. It's a very fascinating subject of how Greek mythology might connect to the Bible, and I think it's very interesting. It's not definitive, obviously, but it's very fascinating. But yeah, these Philistines are very strong. They're very tenacious. Frankly, they're still there today. They call them Palestinians now. It's the same word. And you know that the Romans, when they destroyed the temple in AD 68 or 70, they renamed that place Philistia. That would be like the Russians coming over or the Chinese coming over and defeating all of America and then renaming the place Mexico. That's all Mexico now. That's called displacement and poking fun of your enemies. We're going to call your whole land Mexico. It's not like Mexico is our enemy, but you know what I'm saying? Well, who's our, we don't have an enemy like that. There's we hate each other. But I suppose it would be like calling it Russia or something. But yeah, the Italians, the Romans, actually renamed the whole place Philistia. We're going to name your whole country after your enemies. And it is still called Palestine to this day, and there are still Palestinians living there. Are they actually Philistines? They certainly could be, but I kind of doubt it. Angela?
I just wanted to clarify that you weren't saying that the people there are Greek.
No. No, I am not saying that
If you
the...
look up like the origin of that word that's used for Philistine, it
Mhm.
means sojourner, immigrants.
Yes.
So it's like outsiders, aliens.
Yes. Yes. And I am not suggesting that the Palestinians there now are Greek. I don't know. I think that those Greeks, they might have gone away a long time ago. At least they certainly don't look Greek, but who knows? They're probably Arabs or Syrians or Iraqis or whoever. I don't know.
They're sojourners.
They're sojourners. That's a good way to look at it.
Yes, we have Philistines amassing on the southern border.
Philistines, that's right. Now notice in verse 13, and I'm going to just grab my phone here and take a look at this for just a second. In verse 13, we have another one of these weird anomalies, which we mentioned. So this is Joshua 13, verse 13. Notice that it says, "But the children of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites nor the Maacathites, but the Geshurites and the Maacathites dwell among the Israelites to this day." Now, compare that. We will compare that in a little bit. In chapter 15, it talks about the Jebusites, for example, still remaining in the land. But in those cases, when it says that the Israelites did not dispossess them, it says they live with, but not among. We noticed that strange word among was what happened with Rahab. Her family lived on the outside of the camp of Israel for some time and then lived among the Israelites. We also noticed the Gibeonites. They live among the children of Israel to this day. These Geshurites and Maacathites also live among the children of Israel to this day. That suggests to me that for whatever reason, we don't have any idea how it is or why the children of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites or the Maacathites. We have no idea how that went down. All we do know is that the text tells us that they dwell among, in the midst of, the Israelites, quote unquote, to this day, whenever this was written. Were they somehow grafted in to Israel? It seems that perhaps they were. Why? Was it through trickery? Did the Israelites decide to let them live? Now, you would not know from reading this text, where are these Maacathites and Geshurites from? They're from way up north on the other side of the Jordan. They're above the Sea of Galilee. So they're way up there, and they're on the northern side, on the northeastern side. So they're a ways away. It might be that the children of Israel said, you live quite a ways from here. We'll deal with you one of these days. For now we can be friends. We're not exactly sure if that's part of our territory. So I don't know how it went down, but it's just interesting that it says that they dwell among the children of Israel. So to me, we only saw that in regards to Rahab and her family and the Gibeonites who did join Israel, and we mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, they went back with Nehemiah and Ezra to rebuild the temple, so they had fully joined Israel at some point. So that is suggestive to me, but I don't know exactly why that is. Notice also in verse 14 that Levi is given no inheritance, and Simeon is embedded within the tribal territory of Judah. That is interesting and suggestive to me on a couple of different levels. Now, if you will recall, in Genesis chapter 49, verses 5 through 7, Jacob, I was going to say blessed his children, but that's not exactly the case. Some of them did not get blessed. Some of them had some words pronounced that were not exactly a blessing. It says, in that section that, may God disperse them in Israel. And they certainly were dispersed. And you ask yourself why? Why did that happen? Well, why did Jacob say it happened in Genesis 49? It's because those two boys of his, when their sister got raped, went and slaughtered an entire town and all of its inhabitants except for the women and children. And it was in a fairly ruthless way and done by trickery. So he kind of cursed them, so to speak. But then you look at what happened over the intervening 200 or 400 years, however many it is, however you calculate it, during that whole period of time that Jacob and his family went down to Egypt, and then they stayed there for several hundred years and then came out with Moses. What happened to the Levites during that whole period of time? Something seems to have changed with Levi during that period of time. Notice that the story of the Exodus begins with the family history, and specifically the family history of Moses and his tribe of Levi. They seem to have somehow been, I'm going to suggest to you, there's no direct evidence of it, but perhaps Levi during their stay in Egypt had become dedicated to the Lord. Perhaps. We see a noble and righteous woman and her husband, Moses' parents. They have children. She gives birth miraculously to Moses by all accounts. Miracle child, saved from the hand of Pharaoh. The Levites, when they leave and they go out into the desert and all of the other tribes are involved in idolatry, Levi is the one who does not get involved in idolatry and is actually strapped on their swords and goes around and kills anyone who was involved with either instigating or directly involved with the worship of the golden calf. So it seems to me that in those intervening years, somehow Levi had changed their temperament or been somehow redeemed, purified. I don't know how you want to phrase that, but they had a special place in the whole kingdom because of this, because of their change of behavior, because of their change of character, it seems. The rabbis do strongly suggest that the whole character of the tribe of Levi changed during their period in Egypt. I don't know what their evidence is to suggest that, but I think that from the biblical record, we can certainly infer that. Now, what happened with the other brother who was involved in this great abomination of slaughtering the entire town of Shechem? The rabbis say that the tribe of Simeon did not redeem themselves, did not change in character. Therefore, you look at that map and you see their territory is a small one, and it's within the tribal division of Judah. Now, do you think that there's some reason for that? Why would God, by lot, embed the tribe of Simeon right smack in the middle of the tribe of Judah? What might that suggest to you?
Let's keep them in check.
I think it's to keep them in check.
Keep them from bumping into their neighbors and creating a war.
Keep them from bumping into their neighbors. Angela?
Well, I think back to when I was teaching and I was making a seating chart.
Angela said she thinks back to when she was teaching and she was making a seating chart. Now, what do you mean by that?
You gotta really pay attention to who you put around that little kid.
Keep the knuckleheads in check.
Sometimes the whole classroom seating chart is arranged because of one kid and you're trying to contain him.
It's about containment.
Yes, wasn't Simeon the one who was held in Egypt?
Simeon was also the one who was held by Joseph for...
So he's like the hostage kid.
He was the hostage kid in Egypt, yes, by his brother Joseph. Yep. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think that is God's seating chart. That's a great way to look at it. That God said, okay, Simeon, you sit right there around the good kids. so that you don't have the ability to influence. You're not likely to influence them, and perhaps they'll influence you. That's a great strategy. I used to use it all the time when I was a teacher. You take a knuckleheaded kid and surround him by the A students. Yeah, he's going to irritate the. Yeah, he's going to irritate your top learners, but they're going to be telling him to shut up and keeping him in line. That actually works. It's not for no reason. I think God put Simeon surrounded by the Judites. Those Jews kept Simeon in check somewhat, I think.
That's like putting your unruly freshman surrounded by the varsity football team. You're not going to pick on them.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
You're not going to circumcise any more Philistines.
That's right. That's right. So,
That was like a city of refuge on a big scale.
yeah, that's a good point.
Keep them
Absolutely.
under control.
Hold on just a sec, Carla.
I love cities.
John.
the first 14, since we were with Levi,
Yes.
they didn't give any inheritance, and I don't know how that verse reads for you, for your translation, but it's so strange. Tribe Levi, no inheritance, Yahweh, Elohim, Yisrael, and then fire inheritance.
Yes.
So
The offerings made by fire are their inheritance. Meaning the tithes and offerings belong to them.
can it mean something else?
Can it mean something else? Yeah, absolutely.
It must mean something, especially their history, who they were, what their task was.
Yes, absolutely. I think in a temporal sense, in a plain surface reading of the text, it's telling us that the tribe of Levi doesn't get land; they get stuff. If you want to say it that way, they get free stuff. You're going to be public servants, and you're going to get paid to do the job of serving. But this is a much deeper spiritual side to that too, because you're talking about spiritual offerings. Is there something more to that? Clearly, yes. And let's discuss that in just a sec. I want to get to Carla, and then we'll circle back to that.
You can mute Carla, because your feedback reversed.
I apologize. Carla, go ahead.
Okay, just as you brought up the information about Levi, I've read through the scroll of Yasher before, and I know there's pieces that fit the stuff we're talking about, even about Judah and Simeon, but I can't find that. But just as you brought up the Levi thing, I'm paging through there, and it showed that the Levites didn't even participate, if I'm reading this right, in the making of the bricks when they were slaves. So something was happening at that time, and it'd be in chapter 65 if anyone wants to read that part.
Good.
I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah, good insight. So if you have the book of Jasher, Carla is indicating that in chapter 65 you can read some additional notes in regard to the tribe of Levi historically. That's a good insight. Thank you, Carla. Now, I thought, John, your point is well taken. The fire offerings, is their inheritance. Yeah, there's certainly something to be said for a spiritual side to that. Angela, did you have something you were asking? Okay. So yeah, clearly something is going on there. There's definitely some spiritual meaning there, and I'm not exactly certain what it is. But that takes some more digging for sure. But Levi is a very interesting tribe, and there's so many different spiritual and temporal aspects that need to be explored for sure. Jim?
And they're kind of a bloodthirsty group.
They are, but I think that I've heard people talk about how God channeled their bloodthirstiness and turned them into butchers in the temple,
And all over Israel. If you wanted to have your meat kosher.
So
correct,
yeah, they
you needed them
became.
all over Israel.
Yeah, and there has been some surmising that the tribe of Levi became the shochets, these ritual animal slaughterers, if you wanted to have your animal killed in a humane fashion that was kosher. So there's very interesting things about the tribe of Levi for sure. And, the New Testament talks in at least a few places about us being a kingdom of priests, and that means similar to Levi. So if you want to, I think in the book of Hebrews spends a good amount of time talking about the tribe of Levi, and especially in relation to the high priest and those functions that Yeshua fills as a high priest of Israel. But if that's true, and it certainly is, then yeah, the high priest has a special place and special responsibilities. But what about all the other Levites? If you want to understand your own position in the world, in the kingdom, in the fellowship, you need to study the tribe of Levi and what they are and who they are and what they do, because that is really, really relevant to you as a believer who is trying to be a priest under the headship of the Messiah Yeshua as our high priest. So I think there's a good case to be made that Christians should really become very familiar with the tribe of Levi, because it's instructive for them. It's just hard to do because you kind of get this thing in your head. It's like, oh man, that's all about ritual animal slaughter and the Torah and doesn't have anything to do with Christians. No, it really does if you just get a little bit below the surface.
I love that toward the end of Isaiah, where we're told that even Gentiles can become Levites.
Yeah, there's some fascinating sections at the end of the book of Isaiah that has to do with the Levitical order and the expansion of that. So in the kingdom,
Jews don't talk about that.
No, certainly not. Now, notice also in chapter 13, verse 22, that Balaam comes up again. And I remember Tracy was mentioning that last week, something about Balaam, and here's Balaam again. It seems likely that he stuck around to be, quote unquote, honored by the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, for whom he had been employed to curse the children of Israel, and then finally got them tripped up by some sexual immorality and some liquor. Seemed to work out okay. That's right. So he eventually was killed along with the people who had hosted him. And I think you can certainly drag out an interesting takeaway from that. If you hang around with and make friends with evil people, you'll likely die with them. That's just kind of the way it goes. I want to have, because I only have a couple of notes in chapter 14, and chapter 14 is short. I want to read to you chapter 14, make a couple of comments, and then we'll wrap up, and we'll, believe it or not, tonight we'll do 2 chapters. Isn't that something? We're on fire. So take a look at Joshua chapter 14. It's fairly short. I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. It says, "And this is what the children of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the chief fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel allotted for inheritance to them. Their inheritance was by lot, as Yahweh had commanded by Moses, for the 9 tribes and the half-tribe." We're talking exclusively now about the tribes settling on the west side of the Jordan. Verse 3, "For Moses had given the inheritance of the 2 tribes and the half-tribe beyond the Jordan. But to the Levites, he had given no inheritance among them." There's our third reference to Levi getting nothing. "For the children of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they gave no part to the Levites in the land, except cities to dwell in, and their suburbs for their cattle and for their substance," which is what we talked about briefly a moment ago. "As Yahweh had commanded Moshe, so the children of Israel did, and they divided the land." Verse 6, "Then the children of Judah came near to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, 'You know the word that Yahweh spoke to Moshe, the man of God, concerning me and you in Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of Yahweh, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to search out the land, and I brought him word again, as was in my heart. And my brethren that had gone up with me made the heart of the people melt. But I wholly followed Yahweh my God. And Moshe swore on that day, saying, 'The land upon which your feet have trodden will surely be your inheritance, and your children's forever. for you have wholly followed Yehovah your God. And now behold, Yehovah has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years since Yehovah spoke this word to Moshe, when Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still this day strong, as in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now, for war, both to go out and to come in. And now give me this mountain of which Yehovah spoke in that day, for you heard in that day that Anakim are there, and great fortified cities. If so be that Yehovah will be with me, then I shall dispossess them, as Yehovah said. And Joshua blessed him, and gave Hebron to Caleb the son of Jephunneh for an inheritance. And Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite to this day, because he wholly followed Yehovah the God of Israel. Now the name of Hebron before was Kiryat Arba, the great man among the Anakim, and the land rested from war. So, short chapter, but some interesting things happening there. Number one, the inheritance is decided by lot. They did not just let everybody, this was not like when they opened up everything west of the Mississippi. You know, that great land deal. There was a movie about that. I thought it was pretty great. I don't remember what it was called. Maybe you do.
How the West was won.
How the West was won? Perhaps, yeah. You know, they didn't just send them in there and say, stake your claim. God told them exactly where they were going to go. Now, I don't know if you have really spent much time looking at the idea of the providence of God. Do you know what I mean when I say the providence of God? You heard that expression? What do you think that means, Jimbo?
That everything's going to be as it should be. It's just a matter of waiting on the Lord until He brings His plans to fruition.
Exactly,
He
yes.
will provide.
Yeah, that is essentially the providence of God is, the Calvinists have a very strong emphasis on the providence of God. That everything happens for a reason, that God is ultimately in charge of everything. You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of Orthodox Jewry sees the providence of God in the same way as the Calvinists. That God is absolutely 100% in control of everything. Yes, you have responsibilities, but ultimately God is deciding everything. I mean, you get to the point where they'll tell you, God has decided before you were born whether you're going to be rich or poor, how much money you're going to make this year. Now, Calvin obviously took that idea a little bit strangely in a different direction. Said, oh, God decided before you were even born whether you were going to go to heaven or hell. And the Jews don't think that way. But they do say, God has decided for you everything. How much money you're going to make, who you're going to marry, what your kids are going to be like, the specific challenges that you'll have to face in life, whether you have a soul that is healthy enough to be able to deal with wealth, or whether you don't have a soul that is healthy enough to be able to deal with wealth.
You like a spendthrift?
Yes, if you know, one of the key texts that they go to suggest that is this right here, that yes, but remember, obviously you just saw the caveat to that idea as well. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he earned his place, Hebron. Now, that's a very interesting and curious thing in itself, because Hebron is a very interesting place. It's a rough place. It is technically under the control of Israel now, but it's kind of under control of some kind of, hardcore Palestinian extremists. The Cave of the Patriarchs is in Hebron. Most people who go to Israel for a little tour don't get to go and visit the Caves of the Patriarchs, because it's controlled by Muslims who are not happy when, that's like going to Hawaii or Laguna Beach. It's like the locals don't want you there. So it's kind of hard to go and visit those tourist places like Hebron. This is the place that Joshua inherited. Now, but everyone else was distributed by lot, meaning God decided what every tribe was going to get. On what basis did he decide? Nobody knows. So you might say, well, we merited getting a better land or a worse land. Maybe, maybe not. It can't be totally at random. I think the providence of God suggests not that God is doling things out at random, but that God is doling things out according to the wisdom of God that you cannot perceive and cannot understand at all, necessarily. But I think that the takeaway for me, thinking about the providence of God and the land being inherited by Lot, is that God, when you do rely upon God being the one who is the arbiter of everything in your life, it really, I think, if you're looking at it in a positive light, it is telling you that you have no reason for stress and concern and overtaxing yourself. And, it's interesting that this is from where we get the expression, be happy with your lot.
A lot is also a Dutch word. That means actually like karma or destiny.
Yes.
It's the same word. It is your lot.
Yeah. Your lot is what has been decided for you. A lot of sin comes from not being happy with your lot in life. Jealousy, covetousness, sexual immorality, whatever. If God, God is going to give you what he wants you to have. Now, you can't then, and always balance in all things, you can't then rest on your laurels and say, I'm just going to sit right here and whatever drops into my lap was from God. Doesn't exactly work that way. What it does mean, and I think one of the best expressions that I ever heard about this was somebody was arguing with a Calvinist, and the Calvinist was saying, God decides who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. And they were arguing with somebody who did not share that perspective. And the person who did not share that perspective was like one of these apologists who had they had written multiple books about how to win souls and how to be, clever in your dialogue with non-believers so that you could convince them to worship God or to accept that God exists or whatever. And the Calvinist would say, it's not my business to convince people. It takes the pressure off of me as an evangelist because it's not my job to win souls. That's God's job. All I have to do is speak the truth. And God is the one who opens their eyes and opens their ears. Because you can be as eloquent as you want to be, it does not matter. Now, that doesn't mean you should be stupid and unable to speak what your faith is, but being of a mind that says, well, I need to be clever in how I phrase things so that people will be more apt to listen to me. I don't think that if you've had any experience with sharing the gospel, you're more than likely noticed already that it's really not you. It's not your words. It's God. Because you can say the most stupid thing, and if the time is right in that person's life, the dumbest thing you say is just going to work because it's God who's doing it. And that is the thing that kind of is emphasized by the casting of lots and the providence of God. Tammy?
I was going to say, because I know that I was looking up this scripture, but how God directs your path. So, in Proverbs 16:9, it says, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
Yes.
And I used to put that on the mirror for my kids all the time, because I think that is really important, that you might take a path. I know Angie talked about it one time, and I thought it was really good. It always stayed with me. And she says, you might sometimes go down this path, and you think you're walking, and then
God's guiding
take
you.
off. But you know what? God always
Yeah.
He'll bring you back onto your
Yeah.
on where He wants you to be.
Yeah. Tammy is talking about Proverbs 16.
Yeah, it's Proverbs 16.
Proverbs 16, where it's talking about the steps of a man. He thinks he's guiding his own path, but God is behind the scenes. And I think that it can be interpreted a couple of ways. You're going to fumble around the path, and God's going to help you get back on it. It's certainly a valid way to look at it. There's also an idea that you and God are a team, that you're trying to take the righteous steps, and He's going to help you and guide you where you make mistakes or get you back on the path. Excellent, excellent observation. Jan.
So this was just a few minutes ago from what you were saying previously, but this is just something that I have always tried to refer to because I really think that I do struggle with this.
With what?
It's in James, and it talks about selfish ambition,
Mm-hmm.
and to not be arrogant, and it talks about how we want what we want, right?
Can you give me the chapter and reference?
It's James 3:13.
In James, I'm just so that the people online know what we're talking about because they can't hear very well. James 3:13.
Jealousy, selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant.
And so lie against the truth. Yep. Keep going.
And it does talk about having selfish ambition, but there's another portion here in James that talks about why you are unhappy because
You
want
lust and you
want
do not
selfish
have.
ambition. And my phone will not load. I don't know why. I always can get my Bible app when I'm here with you, but I'm using Angela's Bible now because for some reason I can't get into mine.
You
So
don't know the password.
for some reason I'm sorry that I don't have the full context.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. It.
What I would like to say
Yeah.
is about us wanting to be able to accomplish our selfish ambition and us wanting to give ourselves the stamp of approval at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that is the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if we don't want the Lord's stamp of approval instead of our stamp of approval, then it's backwards. It's all
Yeah.
wrong. It's not where He wants us to be.
Right.
It is so easy to want to give ourselves that stamp of approval,
Yeah.
and I see that with my clients
No,
all the
that's-
time,
that's-
but ultimately, you have to want His stamp of approval more than your own, and we want our selfish ambition to be able for us to create our stamp of approval.
Right.
And then it's just never going to work out.
Right. That's a great observation. So Jan is talking about the passage in James, approximately chapters 3 and 4, where it says, you seek but do not get because you seek to heap it upon your lusts. And you adulterers, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? These type of phrases where we're seeking after our own desires and we're not contented with what God wants to give us, and we want something different. And that is where all kinds of problems come up. And she's right. That is a huge struggle. And aligning our will with God's will is not only a guarantee that we will have a happy and peaceful life, but we'll also always get our prayers answered. When you're praying for the will of God, your prayers get answered every time. But if you're out of alignment with God, your prayers are going up and He's over here. You're missing it. But when you line up with God, your prayers are answered every time. Tough one, though.
Psalm 23.
Psalm 23.
The Lord is my shepherd.
The Lord is my shepherd, yes. So those are excellent observations. So I think inheritance by lot and recognizing the Lord as the sovereign of everything and in control directly, and you just shut up and enjoy it. Just be at peace. Be at peace. And recognize that God has you exactly where He wants you. You don't know why always, but you're there for a reason. You're at the job that you have for a reason. You're at the position in life you're at for a reason. You have the amount of money that you have for a reason. You're with the girl that you're with for a reason. Your grandkids are doing that for a reason. All of it is perfect.
Yeah, and when you look, sometimes like I think about my car accident, you know, and losing David, and I think of all, at that time, you're like, oh, you know, like you go through that and you can't really see that there really, you know, God can use that for good. And I truly believe that he did, because there's been so many people along the way that I have been able to witness to that never in my life, I would have met some of the people that I've met, like John and so many other people along the way that, you know. But
It's amazing to see
it's
interesting and blessing things come out of weird things and tragedies, and that's the grace of God for sure.
And you have to know that there is that, and especially when your faith in God is there, then you can say, you know what, I know that this is tragic and it hurts so bad, but I also know beyond that, that God has blessings, and he will bless my life and anyone else that is around me.
It's hard to keep focused on those things. It's hard to see. It's hard to see when you're going through it and you have these difficulties. You know, when you're right in the midst of them, you can't see very well. No. But trying to remind yourself, or have people around you who can remind you, is really, really critical. So I definitely appreciate your comments. But, you know, when you're going through difficulties, keeping your eyes focused on, there's something good going on here. I don't know how I'm going to see it that way or when. All things work together for good for those who love God. That's right. So that's all that I have for you. So, you know, there's some interesting ideas regarding Caleb and, you know, him being rewarded for his faithfulness. But we'll leave it off right there, and then next time we'll pick up with chapter 15, 16, 17, 18. We'll kind of tie those all together and then get to the end of the book of Joshua, which has some good meat. And then we'll have to, you know, figure out what we're going to study next.